the record going, and you should be right to share your screen now and to go forward.
Fantastic. So first of all, good afternoon to you all. It's a real pleasure to be here, and normally I'm supposed to introduce myself, sound smart, and share my slides at the same moment in Zoom. So I will just do one after the other. I will try to share the slides and then I will continue speaking because I don't think I have enough coffee to make that work immediately.
What time is it in Switzerland, Charles?
Sorry?
What's the time at the moment in Switzerland?
It's 8 minutes past 6 a.m.
Oh, you are so dedicated. Thank you so much.
That's fine. That's okay. No worries. I have enough coffee and that's kind of my normal start. So can you see my screen?
Yep.
That worked. That's pretty good. So thanks a lot for the introduction. I can only agree with the compliments. The only one I would remove is the couple of decades. So if we can keep that short, that's gonna make me feel much better. And just about whistleblowing, I mean, this has been a topic over the past roughly 15 years, which I kept on scratching my head. I just couldn't agree year over year on the way it was designed and the way it was implemented because it wasn't matching common sense. It was matching every type of policy evolution in the world, but it just wasn't matching common sense. So I tried first 12, then 10, then 8, then 5 years ago to continuously change the setup in the organizations I've been working in. And to my surprise, it has actually worked. So you can make a difference. A lot of the things which I will talk about are common sense, but because the setup we are using, and I had a couple of reads through the latest legislation in Australia on whistleblowing, are not making it very easy for us to go back just to that very easy thing. And actually, when we look at it, whistleblowing is, I'm utterly convinced, our biggest competitive advantage as an organization. So just on the next slide and a little bit about me. So I'm Charles, I'm French. I grew up in Germany. This is why you don't have the French accent when I'm speaking. And I recently joined Unisys, helping the organization to a little bit revamp, upgrade their compliance program. There is an obvious disclaimer. So all the opinions that you will hear on the slides are the ones of me and not the ones of my employer, even though ironically they are paying me to convince them that it should be their opinions. So, but I still need to make the disclaimer. I think the easiest thing to understand whistleblowing is just to make it as simple as possible. So I would like you to meet Bob. And Bob is kind of your superstar employee. Bob is the guy who is really delivering. He's giving you the sales numbers. He's achieving his targets. He is your employee. He's your guy somewhere in the field. He's a really nice chap and he's really getting things done. And Bob is evolving, and month after month and year after year, all of a sudden he encounters something which is really a mess up. Something which just doesn't sit right with him. Okay, no, that's not the way he should look when he sees that it's more like this. But Bob is just seeing something which doesn't sit right with him at home. And Bob is then starting what behavioral scientists call this whole internal process of trying to digest the reality and enter in a pretty dual conflict. And if you think of it, if we make things really simple, the first conflict of interest that we have is in the morning when we need to make a decision between pressing for the third time the snooze button or getting to work. And if we really boil it down, there are 3 basic reasons that Bob is going to work every morning. The first one, he has bills to pay. As simple as that. The second one, he wants somehow, in whatever kind of way, to get recognition. Now, that can be super broad, but that recognition can be all the one that he's not getting at home, that he never got at home. That can be recognition for his fantastic stellar performance. That can be that amazing feeling when you are in a sales organization at a national meeting you are called up on the stage and everybody is clapping and saying you achieved again or you over-delivered. And the third reason he is stopping to press the snooze button is that he would like this to continue in the future. He basically would like a promotion or just would like to have some kind of certainty in the future. And all those things, when he sees something that isn't sitting right in his organization, are all of a sudden at stake. They just seem to be jeopardized. And this is what we tend to forget when we talk about whistleblowing, is that if we put ourselves in the shoes of Bob, at the moment he saw something which isn't right, he goes to the worst case scenario. What am I going to do about it? And all his decisions on speaking up or not speaking up, blowing the whistle, are somehow influenced by these things that are the very intrinsic reasons for him coming to work to your organization being all of a sudden at stake. Now, what do we do as an organization to make it work? Well, I took the DOJ, but I could have taken any type of regulation, and I'm going to spare you the big reading, but we need an efficient, trusted mechanism that employees can anonymously or confidentially report allegations. We need to include proactive measures that we create a workplace atmosphere without fear of retaliation, and process submission complaints, protect the whistleblower. I mean, I don't think any one of us would think that it is a good idea just to use this DOJ part and present it as a poster in your coffee room. I mean, it just wouldn't sit. And this is also pretty much what Bob is seeing, but the reality is that we as an organization want to comply with regulation, which means we're gonna follow by the letter exactly what is imposed on us. If it says you need to make it confidential and anonymous, then we're gonna promote it. If they say you need to have a whistleblowing mechanism, then we're going to have a whistleblowing policy. And just think of it, how does whistleblowing feel to you? I mean, do you really imagine that Bob wants to blow the whistle? Let's imagine it for a second. So for real, what do you have in your organization? And if you don't recognize yourself in this, on this slide, that means you're already much more advanced. But most of the time, we need first to find the whistleblowing line. And I really encourage you, try it yourself, put yourself in the shoes of Bob and try once in an organization to speak up. Like do it for real and measure it from a user experience, as you would do with your own products that you're trying to sell. Then once you found it, after 5-7 clicks somewhere hidden behind a code of conduct, which is somewhere on the intranet, then you need, because you're forced to, read the terms and conditions. So you will acknowledge that if the house is burning, this isn't the right number, this is not an emergency. Normally, in average, you're going to read 7 times that you can be anonymous, just to be sure. And of course, it's depending on your country, because we look at it from a compliance perspective. So we make sure that you know that we can imagine that you could be in a different country. Bob doesn't care. I mean, he's sitting on his chair. He's just thinking, should I speak up or not? And we really encourage you to believe that this is going to be processed confidentially. Then once you're there, you're going to select the violation category, which is an exact matching of our case management system categories, which has been written, reviewed, and approved by a lawyer and an outside counsel. And you had 15 people with at least 10 years past bar exam who reviewed those categories. And you can imagine that Bob is just thinking, okay, is this now really harassment? Is this bribery? Is this, I mean, you know, all those big terms that just are not his day-to-day reality. And obviously you will read and trust that no, there is no retaliation. So if you didn't think of the pink elephant in the room before, now we make sure you're going to think of it. And normally some organizations are smart enough to tell you that if this isn't good faith, then you're going to face severe consequences. So sometimes the miracle happens. People don't stop at that moment and they really do speak up. And I tried at least 50 different systems and setups over the last 3 years. In average, it takes 15 minutes until you can start typing or telling to an operator your story. So between the moment you made the decision, I'm going to speak up, and the moment you actually can do it, it's 15 minutes. And imagine you are in the supermarket. You made the decision to buy that cake. And then the shopkeeper would tell you, look, wait a second, these are the terms and conditions. Are you really sure? Can you imagine that if you eat that cake, it's not going to be good for your health unless, I mean, we wouldn't sell our product that way, but this is exactly what we do with whistleblowing because it's so important to us that we follow the law. In the whole process, we seem to be forgetting that we actually would like people to speak up. And I had a lot of discussions about this, but if in the room we have people who are receiving speaking up, very likely you're going to share the feeling that you have a really nice day, it's sunny out there, it's Friday, you're looking forward to the weekend with your family, and then you get a whistleblowing report. I mean, no one is jumping up his chair and saying, yoo-hoo, finally someone bought my product. You know, this is going to be a really messy Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
I mean, this is reality. And in compliance, we work in that schizophrenic world that we are promoting a product, really hoping that no one is going to buy it because it's super counterintuitive and it's going to mess up our agenda. And this is exactly the way we portray the design of it. So the whole idea for me is really to go through how we can change that. And it's not about not following the law, but there is a way to follow it in a way that people are actually going to buy that product. Now, the first thing that comes to my mind is if you have kids in whatever age, very likely that's going to be familiar to you. And if you don't, just remember when you were a kid. You know that very awkward feeling when you got that math or physics, or for me it was chemistry. I was never really good in chemistry test back, and it just wasn't exactly the grade that you were supposed to get, nor the grade that you think your parents would want you to get. You go through that whole mechanism. Am I gonna tell? Am I gonna speak about this at home? So you can decide to delay, you can decide to wait for the right moment to talk to your parent. And all that decision-making process on are you gonna blow the whistle on yourself, are you gonna speak up, is informed by past experience. It is informed by how did your parents react the last time you really messed up on something. Did you get house arrest? Were you forbidden to have your iPhone? Okay, that doesn't apply to me because there simply just weren't iPhones at that time, but there are all these reactions in our subconscious, and how predictable is it? And through parenting, through that horrible curve, we learn that the more predictable we can make it to our kids and how we're going to react, the more likely they are to come to us and say, I crashed the car. And by the way, we need to go to the police because I also did something else. And yes, we're going to have those odd moments when the kids move from teenage to big teenage and to young adults. Now, if we apply that to whistleblowing and to our friend Bob, what could really change the rationale for the reporter to speak up? And what would we do instinctively to make sure we get speaking up, and how would we sustain it in the long run? And the things that we will talk about here are not rocket science, to be very honest, but they just seem to be so difficult to implement. What would change is to remove fear. Now, this is a very easy first step. Maybe let's stop calling it whistleblowing. I mean, it's okay that in the law it's written as whistleblowing, but this is not exactly what anyone wants to be. I mean, no one is going to get home on a Friday evening and tell the whole family, guys, get together, I have a big announcement, I'm the whistleblower. No, you just don't do that. This is counterintuitive, this doesn't make sense. So let's remove fear for a second. Let's try to humanize it. Now, if we remove it, we could actually try to replace it with certainty. And this is quite difficult because that means talking about the pink elephant by putting lipstick on a pig and trying to have people really feel that this is something which can go in the right way. But this is actually the only way to do it. So practically speaking, the more people can have a feeling of what's going to happen when they come to you and tell you that there is a mess up, that they can predict your reaction, the more likely they are to come and come again. They will test it. As kids come and test it, they first tell you, oh, by the way, I got my math test back. It wasn't that good. It was a C. And then they look at your reaction. And if they see that you're relatively relaxed, they may pull out the chemistry test, which was an E. But for that, they need to test your reaction. I mean, this is exactly what they do. And employees do exactly the same. They tell about a small thing. They look at how the organization is reacting. And then they may come a couple of weeks later and tell about a bigger thing. So the first takeaway from my perspective is make speaking up predictable and make sure everyone knows. And here, really the best thing that I've seen working are senior people in an organization, not necessarily from compliance, and we can apply the hypo principle, really the highest paid person in the organization, in the room, in the department, just simply explaining, guys, if you come to me to tell me that you messed up on something, this is how I'm going to react. And I want you to know. Normally, I'm going to be upset. I may be shouting for 2 minutes, and that's just my way of dealing with the emotions, but that's not against you. And then we're going to sit down, get a coffee, close the door, and try to fix it. But let's be clear, unless you killed someone or you got us to bankruptcy, your job is safe. Don't worry about it. And yes, we need to keep on repeating that message. But this is not what we are doing. What we keep on repeating is whistleblowing is confidential. We don't tolerate retaliation, and your request will be processed anonymously, and you need to read the terms and conditions. And this is what we keep on repeating people. We don't tell them what's actually going to make them feel good about reaching out when there is a mess. Now, once you made it predictable, there is also really the big question on technically how to speak up. So if you go back to the DOJ and to the requirement, it's really said it needs to be confidential. You need to have the ability to make it anonymous. If you're working across the globe, then someone told you, someone very wise, very likely the provider who is also charging you the fees for your system, that you need to have translators in 152 languages, that most likely you're going to get 2 reports in 20 years, and you will implement a fantastic helpline. Now, don't get me wrong. Yes, you need to have a dedicated helpline number or something which is really independent, and this is the best practice. The only thing is that because you spend 100K on it a year and it's hitting your compliance budget and you know you're not going to get rid of it, then you try to promote that you're doing this. And if you look at all the promotion campaigns that we are doing in organizations about whistleblowing, there is in big red letters the number of the helpline, which is pretty much telling Bob, look, Bob, we know you're really feeling a little bit anxious that you could lose your job. We know you saw something which could put your company at risk. We know your hesitance in 3 days to speak up or not. We really encourage you to call this number, which has nothing to do with us, is completely anonymous, is somewhere super far away, handled by people who don't know you, who don't know us, and you can really trust them. That would mean, if we go back to the kid example, telling your kid, look, if you really mess up, we encourage you to find a complete stranger in the street, go to that person, trust that person, and tell that person that you got a bad grade, and that person is going to tell us without telling us who you are. I think now we all realize that this is so much against common sense, but we keep on doing it. And we keep on hoping that someone is going to use that helpline number. And we are so surprised when people actually do that, wow, this actually did work. And then we're going to have those nice charts that we show in board meetings where we say, oh, we had 2 more fraud cases compared to the last quarter. So the anonymity rate is only 20% and the substantiation rate is 52% versus 51%. And by the way, if you studied mathematics, you know that the numbers are completely statistically irrelevant because the pool of your speaking up is simply too small. I mean, there is just no sense in that. So the same questions again, what could we do to change the rationale for the reporter? I mean, what could we do to fix this problem while still having that helpline number implemented? Well, let's try to put ourselves in the shoes of Bob. I know this sounds super simple, but we forget that. People in marketing, they're super good at it. They put themselves in the shoes of the consumer. Is the consumer gonna buy my chocolate cake? What should I do in terms of marketing to make sure that they get attracted to my chocolate cake? We need to do exactly the same with the process that we are giving people to speak up. And we should offer to listen and to provide alternatives. So not just there is this big, huge anonymous helpline number. Now, I know most of us do it. So most of us tell instinctively people, look, there's this helpline number. And by the way, if something is wrong, you can speak to me also. That's already a good step in the right direction. But the best practice is really to explain to employees is, look, if you see something which isn't right, talk to your boss. If you don't feel like talking to your boss, talk to the boss of your boss. If that still doesn't feel right, talk to the boss of your boss, and you can play through the food chain. And if you don't feel like this, go to the human resource person. If you don't feel like this, find a lawyer in the building. And by the way, I'm always here to listen to you. Just give them human beings. And this is exactly what we keep on avoiding. We keep on avoiding telling people that they are human beings who are there to listen, also for whistleblowing. And the reason we do that is that we are brainwashed by the fact that this needs to be anonymous, confidentially processed with whistleblower protection and so on. So we push that down on people. But the reality is that human beings speak up to human beings. This is the brutal reality, but for whistleblowing, we completely forget that very simple thing. And if you go back in your own history, when you had big moments in your life that didn't feel right, and you were driving in circles around the block for 3 hours in the night, not really knowing how to do and what to do, the first thing you wanted to do is to call a friend. Call a human being that you trust, where you know he's going to listen to me, he's not going to judge me, not necessarily because that person could help you actually, but you just wanted someone to listen. And this is exactly what we don't do with most whistleblowing programs today. And every time there is a new law coming or a new DOJ recommendation, we tend to make it even more difficult because there is one small paragraph and then you have all the people enforcing that this is the change compared to the last version. And that mainly goes onto whistleblower protection. And so we keep on reinforcing that this is a dehumanized process. And because it's dehumanized, it's going to be so great. I've even seen providers who are now using artificial intelligence and a chatbot to answer whistleblowers' requests. So you can chat with them because someone told them that people are more likely to chat because they're generation somewhere in the alphabet between Z and X, and I have no clue. Well, I haven't seen anyone in any organization going and telling me, I have been sexually harassed, can you please help me? And the chatbot answering, oh, I'm so sorry how you feel. No. These are the people who, instead of doing this, just quit their job and find another company where they feel much better. Now, the last thing is maybe the one which is the most common sense and the one we use the least. So, you know, I would love this picture, by the way, to become real once in my life, but I've never ever seen this. I mean, okay, I've seen it from two people, but they were in the last phase of the recruitment process to join my team. And one of them really came with that sentence, say, wow, I did such a great e-learning yesterday. And I said, wow, which company are you working for? Because I don't think that any of my e-learnings are good. We didn't hire the guy. So we keep on pushing down to people big trainings. And at the end of every training, we are putting, oh, and you need to speak up. Now, look back at those slides and look at all the messages you're putting before the you need to speak up, you need to blow the whistle. So normally, we really want to make sure we cover the big ticket items. So this is going to be anti-bribery, corruption prevention, antitrust. This is going to be harassment, discrimination, sexual harassment, workplace violence, health and safety, where we are showing pictures whose hands has been cut off by the machine because we want to prevent that. And all those things are super important. Don't get me wrong, they need to happen. But once we messaged people on all those super severe things, we tend to finish that training by the slide saying, and if you see anything happening like this, call this number. Whistleblowing is going to protect your company. This is like sitting through a horror movie, watching that movie, and at the end having an invite to call a friend. While you will associate whistleblowing with all those horrible things happening. And what happens is that people put the threshold for whistleblowing, which is already such a difficult thing to do, very high, which means most of the people are then sitting there or Bobs and like, well, I saw this, but this isn't such a big deal. I wouldn't want to bother them. I mean, no one is bribing here anyone, no. And they rationalize all the really good reasons why they shouldn't speak up. And we all know that what we actually would want people to do is to come to us fast. When they see a small thing derailing, that they come to us. We would want Bob, if he sits in a big meeting on Zoom or in a room and sees his boss starting to lose his temper, shouting around and making a stupid sexist joke, we would want someone in that room to call us and say, hey, I don't think it's a big deal, but my boss, again, he had this sexist joke and I don't feel like I can tell him to stop doing that, but someone should do something about this. Is this compliance related? At that stage, very likely it isn't. Are you going to open up a massive investigation? No. Are you going to do something about it? Yes, because you care about your people. And if that guy gets counseling 2-3 times, a little bit harsher, then very likely he's going to realize that sexist jokes are not going to help his promotion. And you will very likely avoid a severe sexual harassment claim that's going to get you to court and enable you to make good friends with your next best outside counsel, who's going to be very happy in terms of fees that he's going to get for that case. But that's not exactly the purpose of the whole thing. So what can we do to change? Well, relatively simple. Make it about them. Instead of making whistleblowing about the big ticket items where anyhow you need to have it, focus your whistleblowing campaign on what matters most. So replace the big drama and just tell them the honest truth, which is, guys, we are all in this together. We are transforming as a company. We have goals to achieve. We have a business to run. And if you see anything which is just odd or just doesn't make sense in your daily job, come to me, come to HR. You can also call this number, by the way, it's anonymous, and tell us about it. Because ultimately what you want is to have people who come to you, raise their concerns as early as possible so that you can intervene and you can actually use whistleblowing for what it was designed to. It wasn't designed to get people in jail. It was designed to protect your company. And like everything, you need to repeat it and repeat it again. If you see one commercial advertisement on TV for a product, that will trigger something in your brain. If you see it 20 times, then you will start to believe it. And it's the same with whistleblowing, speaking up. Because employees want to protect their team and their company. And here we are going back to Bob, who stopped snoozing in the morning and got to work. He wants to protect those 3 reasons. I want to be able to pay the bills. I would like to have someone clapping about my performance, and I would like to sustain that in the future. Those 3 basic instincts that makes that connection between an employee and your organizations are the ones that people want to protect. And if you anchor your speaking up communication, campaign, policy around that, and you genuinely communicate it that way, then all of a sudden it starts to resonate with people. Because they want to protect those 3 things. And if we go into behavioral science, this is all about loss aversion. People don't want to lose what they have. And if we design the whistleblowing campaign around that, and sorry that I keep on using whistleblowing simply because this is the term, but the speak up campaign, then all of a sudden people will speak up. Now, we just need to be ready to get it, because as you remember, we all know that Friday afternoon speaking up report that got to our mailbox, this isn't the funniest thing to get, but people will speak up. So really the takeaway from my perspective is make it predictable, make it human, and make it about your business. That still means you need to have someone on a page written that this is anonymous, this is confidential, there is whistleblower protection and all of that, but you shouldn't be leading your whole communication with that. At least personally, I don't think that's really making sense or adding value. So this is pretty much the end of, I would say, where I keep on speaking and everyone is muted. So we can turn it around. Okay, I'm not going to mute myself because then I cannot answer questions, but how do you feel about it? What questions do you have? And more than happy to move it to very practical.
I was going to say, Charles, do you want to cut the screen share too, so we can get the tile back up, and then
cut the screen share? Oh, that means stopping the screen share. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. If you stop the screen share, then I'll re-maximize the screen and we'll go.
We'll be able to see everyone's faces.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now I can see you all much bigger, because before it was all small pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to say, look, that was an incredible presentation, Charles, and certainly Bronwyn and I were intermittently writing notes feverishly at the same time, trying not to laugh out loud while we weren't on mute. So you've entertained and informed us all at the same time. That was great. So I'm sure there's plenty of questions the room may have to ask Charles, and we've positioned it around time. So we've got just over 15 minutes for questions. So what we might do is just keep them orderly and one by one, passing notes in class. Yeah. So Brian, I think you wanted to get the ball rolling, and then I'll hand it over to the room. So
okay, cool. Thanks, James, and thanks, Charles. That was a really fantastic presentation. So recently here in Australia, we actually had a case reported in the newspapers about, and it was with a government agency, whistleblowing was bad for your career. And so that was the feedback that the person got when they were wanting to make a report. And so we know that in Australia, ASIC is the regulator. They have a lot of information on the ASIC webpage about whistleblowing and protections for whistleblowers. What's some of the issues that you've seen in your experience, Charles, either seen or experienced in relation to protections for whistleblowers?
I mean, first of all, we start thinking about protecting a whistleblower when the person comes to speak up to us. At least I try to fix the problem when the problem is arriving, because every single reporter, I just don't want to call them whistleblower, is different.
Yeah.
And there is no one-fit-all setup, but we try to make a one-fit-all setup. And the most practical approach is that the people who are entitled to receive speaking up by default in your company, they should be trained in a certain way. And then the whole rest of your organization should be trained to communicate with those people. Now, the basics there is what the person, the whistleblower, needs to relatively feel good about it is that those three intrinsic things that matter the most, like I'm going to keep my job, I will keep up a salary, and people will not look bad at me at the coffee corner, are safe. And that's the most practical thing you need to do, which is when you get to speaking up, is just being honest and saying, look, our conversation is confidential, and confidentiality means that only people who need to know will know. And those people are, depending on what you will tell me, but normally I'm going to call my boss, and my boss is bound by the same rules. I'm going to call a senior lawyer in the company because you're talking to me about legal things. And I will talk to HR. And that's going to change based on what the person is telling you, but you just need to be honest about it. And I've seen it so many times that we, excuse my English, bullshit people in telling them, we will protect you from all types of mishappenings happening in the world. That's not true. I mean, sorry. we all know how an investigation is happening. People who need to know will know. And if you're honest about it with an employee, they are absolutely fine with it. Now, what matters is what you do during and after the investigation. During the investigation is keeping the contact with the reporter, and instead of keep on reassuring them, I've seen that so many times that the compliance officer calls and, oh, how are you doing? I hope everything is okay. Look, we need a little bit more 3-4 weeks, and we keep it confidential, and then they hang up, which is nothing else than enabling the compliance officer to tick on his to-do list that he kept contact with the reporter, is just to say, hey, how is it going? And then pause and listen. And then you take all the nervous emotions of the reporter with you, and you say, relax, don't worry, we keep on investigating. The fact that you didn't hear from me for the past 3 weeks doesn't mean anything is bad. It simply means I was on vacation last week. So really nothing to worry about. So with that, the whistleblower will feel protected through the investigation, because feeling protected is about feeling respected and listened to. And after the investigation is keeping the same contact. The best retaliation protection is ensuring that the reporter is listened to and that you intervene if you see something happening which shouldn't be. Like, oh, they changed the whole sales territory for Bob, and he got one of the shittiest sales territories in the country, and all of a sudden his numbers are going to drop. Of course, he's going to be fired later on. These are things that you should watch out for. Retaliation is very subtle.
Okay. Thank you.
But
Okay. No, that was excellent. So
Thank
look,
you.
yeah, thank you, Charles. So look, we'll open it to the floor now. So yeah, obviously we've got to try and not talk over the top of each other, which is always tricky on Zoom. But yeah, so was there other questions from the group that would like to be fired out? Otherwise we're going to start picking on people. And Rupert, I'm looking straight at you.
David here. Sorry, David here from Melbourne.
Yeah.
Go
for it, David.
Charles, at the beginning of your presentation, you made a comment about Australia's legislation. How do you see the legislation and fitting in with what you're saying about whistleblowing and encouraging people to come forward?
Honestly, when I read it for the first time, I thought it makes a lot of sense. And I will tell you what I really liked about it. I liked it about it that there are fines. I mean, there is this, and I discovered that in Australia you have this pecuniary value, which very likely is going to evolve as the government needs its budget update. But I think that simply makes a lot of sense, because it's forcing a corporation and it's making the life of a compliance officer easier, saying, we really need to follow this law, because if we don't, this is the price tag. So that's the first thing. The second one, it is geared in the right direction. I mean, it's about protecting the reporter. The problem is never with the legislation. The problem is with lawyers, with all due respect for legal professionals, applying the legislations to a very tricky human behavior in a legalistic way. This is the problem. Not doing that whole translation. And I would use an analogy is when you go to your doctor and your doctor says, hi, Charles, you have 3 months to live. He applied exactly his science and his knowledge to my case. He didn't care about how I feel, how I'm going to take the message, what am I going to do with it, if that's okay for me. He just applied. And this is what we tend to do with legislation. We don't buffer, we don't translate, and we don't make it human.
Because one of the things we've seen with the whistleblowing policies, which at large, there are a number of mandatory requirements for the policies, but people are putting these policies together just to tick the box and not really making them, operationalising the policies and making it easy for whistleblowers. Perhaps you haven't seen any of these policies, but that's what we're seeing in reviewing, client policy. So you have any comments about the way the policy should be set up?
I mean, I think the most practical zero budget cost approach, because no compliance officer is going to get additional budget because there is a policy change, is you take the policy as is, you put it there, you say, this is the policy, this is the legislation, and then you put a communication package around it. And the communication package should include the three following things. It should come from the highest paid person in the organization, if he's able to deliver it credibly. I mean, if you know he isn't a good communicator, it's not going to come across, then take one below, but just take someone at board level who can honestly communicate. Second, it should use human language. And that means normally making sure that you don't use any of the words which are in the policy. So just make it as human, as down to earth as possible. And third, it should be practical. So I give you one example. If you imagine a managing director going on Zoom and saying, guys, just wanted to let you know there's this new policy. You probably heard about it in the news. It's about whistleblowing, and I hate the word whistleblowing because it just makes noise. I'd rather have people speak up. I'd rather have people care about this company, and I want to tell you why it's important to me. And then you have that managing director taking a personal experience from their life when they saw something in the business which didn't sit right, and how they handled it and how they went to their boss and they got a positive experience. And in that way, yes, you communicated the policy, you're absolutely in line, but you also translated it to your organization in a way that makes them feel good about working for your company. And
right.
if states would do that with tax law, I think they would have a much better budget, because all of a sudden we would pay our taxes much faster. Because we would realize why it makes sense.
Thanks.
Hilarious. So, thanks, David. Great question. Sorry, and no, Rupert, I saw your mute come off, so over to you, mate.
Yeah, it was a fantastic presentation. I just wondered, given your sort of international experience, like one of the challenges I've seen a lot is socializing this across large organizations where you have a lot of different cultures and very different attitudes to the impacts of speaking up that maybe come from, you know, culture, the political environment in those places, etc., etc. And so that's part one, what tips do you give? And secondly, I'm working with an Aussie organization at the moment that the compliance manager is just coming in new, and they have all these policies, frameworks in place, and nobody's really using them. So they're doing a kind of a sentiment analysis thing that I'm helping them with to actually understand how people view compliance, and the components of it are, you know, there's an assumption in all this that people know what they should be speaking up about. And often they don't. And secondly, where they should go is very complicated, and all of the issues you've highlighted. So it's about the sort of the purpose of it is to understand what you should speak up about, to whom and how. And so I was wondering what advice you would give to people in those situations where you're trying to socialize it across a broad area, particularly when it hasn't worked in the past.
This is a very, very good question. And I mean, first of all, to be honest, it's try and error, but you need to make sure you do the right tries. The one thing which has worked for me is when I'm trying to make it work in a given cultural context in a given country, then I invest time in understanding how those people tick, think, feel, and make it very practical. So I give you one example. One of my jurisdictions before was Spain and Portugal, which were part of my region. And even within Europe, we could tend to think that, well, they are on the same part of the country, so it should be similar. They're super different because they have a different history. And in both countries, I spoke to roughly 20-25 people, very openly, kind of Zoom, coffee, let's talk, or before Zoom, it was like in a real room. And I asked them exactly the real question, which is, look, I really want people to speak up. I want to feel good about speaking up, and I want to know what would prevent people from speaking up. Let's talk about it. And I got super interesting insights. So I'm going to give you some examples. One of them is people explaining me there is such a mess with the government, with the economy, that people genuinely don't trust the bigger jurisdictional system of the country. So if you come to them telling them that this is a fair process and independent, they just couldn't care less. That's not going to resonate with them. But one told me, it was a big factory. They said, you know, people in this factory, they are so proud to work for this factory because since generations they work in this factory. And they would for sure speak up if they feel that their factory is at risk. So what would we do? Try and error. We came up with a little campaign, which was basically small town halls, small things where you sit down with people, and we framed the communication of speaking up around that. And it works. So, but it's really adaptation. So it's never a one fit all. And this is why when you communicate the policies, really take a quite high person in the organization, but make sure that you give them the necessary insight so that they can adapt their messaging. And that's particularly difficult if you're flying in an expat to a country who has no clue about the culture. You really need to do that homework. And on the people don't know what to speak up about, I mean, most of the time what you see is us trying to explain to people what they should speak up about. So I've seen so many communications and I've done it myself. So I'm the first one to blame, which is explaining, look, if you see this type of 5 things and they are in this context, then you go to the compliance officer. If you see this type of things, this is more performance related, you go to the HR manager. And people go away saying, I cannot care less. Why do I need to remember and learn a decision tree when I'm feeling at risk of losing my job? So the best way to replace is actually to have compliance and HR or compliance and law having a pre-agreement and going together to the presentation and saying, guys, honestly, you're going to have all sorts of reasons to speak up. But the most important is you feel it. When you have that feeling that something just doesn't sit right, what we want you is not to be alone with that. Pick up the phone. Call me, call my colleague in HR. You don't need to find out who would be the best one to call. You should call the person with whom you feel most comfortable. And we're going to sort it out for you. And that dramatically can change your speak up rate.
Yeah.
It's like telling a person, we know you want a car. You need to figure out which brand you want. Or to tell them, you know what, go to any dealer and we're going to make you try different cars. It's easier.
Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Rupert. Great question. So look, we've got about 4 minutes left. So was there any other questions or commentary from the floor? Because I think we all agree it was a tremendous presentation from Charles today. So don't be shy, even for the new entrants. Oh, go for it, Theo. Love to hear from you.
Awesome, thank you. I think this was kind of already answered, but I mean, what's the best way to deal with, I guess, the situation where people are reporting where you, like for example, myself, I wear multiple hats. So I'm general counsel, company secretary, head of governance, risk and compliance. So I will deal with, I guess, the requests coming in, as well as the interpretation of the law and then kind of pushing it up the line. So I feel like a lot of it would sit with me, but doing different things. So I guess what's the best way to manage that, and then managing any sort of inherent conflicts between the positions?
So that's a very fair question. What I try to do personally is when I was receiving a speaking up, I was behaving in a certain way, which I will talk about. And when I was talking about speaking up, I tried to mirror the same behavior. And that behavior was to say, look, it doesn't actually matter what you are coming to speak up about, in which category, in which bucket it falls. What matters is that you come and that we know what happened. So tell us your story. Tell me your story, and then we're going to talk about it and we'll try to understand it together. And it's completely irrelevant which policy is being violated or at risk of being violated. That's so secondary. That's our own legal kitchen. For the employee, it doesn't matter. And I really forced myself when I'm receiving speaking up and sitting in my office or at home and doing it over Zoom, never ever to categorize anything, never ever to give the feeling to the reporter that I started to bucket his story in where is it going to sit. Because that's really our own kitchen. I've never seen a reporter asking me at the end of an investigation, and by the way, which section of the policy has been violated here? They don't care unless they want to take you to court. But normally, so it's, and I try to mirror that when I talk about speaking up, which is to say, look, this is not about which policy is violated. This is simply about you not feeling good to come to work because you've seen something that just doesn't sit right. And my job is to make sure that we can remove that pain and make you feel good about contributing to our company. Make it about the business.
Excellent. No, thank you, Theo. That was a great question. And look, we've got we've got one more that Dave wanted to ask. So Dave, I think you're good to go, mate. We've got a couple of minutes. So did you want to unmute and go for it?
Yeah, I think Rupert just posted something in there as well. So my question, Charles, was around, does the policy include volunteers? I work in the not-for-profit space, and I was just interested because one of the clients was implementing a policy, but they outsourced, the process to a third party. But I was just inquiring, does it include, or do you involve the volunteers? How does that work?
I would make it very simple. The more people can speak up, the better. Now, at the same time, you're playing on a fine edge, because if you open up your program too broadly, then you may get noise from competitors, from journalists, anonymous reports, all that mess. So you need to tingle that. So what I would do is the very human approach that we spoke about is for your employees or your contractors who are really doing a core job for you. And the further you go out of this circle, the more I would shift to the more legalistic approach of having the helpline number there promoted. It's really doing that shift. And the best way to explain it is, I think you care most about the people close to you. So your speaking up communication should mirror that level of care. And the best compliance officer I've seen doing, he had one slide in his compliance presentation, one slide. And that slide went up, there was his face picture, and next to it was his mobile phone number. And he said to people, we're gonna spend 1 hour together, and if there is one thing I want you to remember is that this number can be on your speed dial, maybe not number 1, maybe number 2, because this is the only important thing in the whole compliance program in this company. If you don't feel good because you've seen something, call me. And never worry about disturbing me. If I'm sleeping or I'm doing something else and not at work, then I'm gonna shut it off. So you will never disturb me, and I will get back to you in 24, 48 hours. You can send me WhatsApp, text. And that was his whole speaking up campaign. And he had tremendous success because he just made it so simple, so easy and so human that it worked. And he had a marketing background, by the way. He moved from sales to marketing to compliance, which is actually really great.
Wow, no, that's great response. Thank you, Charles, and thanks for the question, David. And yeah, I think we agree. Yeah, that's a pretty amazing journey for someone to go from marketing to sales to compliance. Yeah, I wonder how they felt when they first landed in compliance. But look, we probably better wrap it up. But we just had a moment. I just wanted to again just reinforce. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us from Europe, Charles, and it was a tremendous presentation. And for me, I couldn't help but write down the line that he had about, it's like asking your child to find a complete stranger, tell them they got a bad test result, and then that stranger comes to tell you that they got a bad test result, but they won't tell you who told them. I reckon that was the absolute winner for me. I'll remember that for many weeks. So look, yeah, thank you again, everyone, for taking the time to join us as well today. I hope you got as much out of the session as we did. It was good to see lots of smiling faces, and thank you for some great questions as well. And thank you again, Charles. And look, at this stage, we're probably not going to run an event in December because we might look to run a for reals social event for those of us that are at least based in Australia. So apologies, Rupert and Charles. We'd love to have you with us, but maybe not this time.
Well, the bubble might open.
Yeah, the bubble may open. It may. So anyway, look, have a